Did you know that more people now get their news online than from any other source? MaineWebNews.com covers the current events forming the trends of tomorrow. Experience the future of Maine news today at MaineWebNews.com.
Welcome to the Maine Web News gubernatorial series, where we sit down with the candidates to discuss their positions on certain issues. Today we're going to talk about the Medicinal Marijuana Act that was passed by 59% of Maine voters and then almost immediately amended by the legislature and the governor.
And now, Maine Web News.
Today's episode of Maine Web News is brought to you by Remedy Compassion Center. Remedy Compassion Center is honored to be chosen by Maine's Department of Health and Human Services to provide medical marijuana to patients looking for a safe and effective alternative medicine. Please call Remedy Compassion Center toll-free at 1-800-809-1464 if you have any questions about Maine's medical marijuana program.
Well, I'll be honest with you, my grandmother, experienced breast cancer, and then she took medicinal marijuana back. It's probably 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and back then I was kind of mortified. My grandmother's like, taking marijuana. I was like, whoa. But I understand, and I saw firsthand what relief that gives, to a patient or a loved one. So I am an advocate of allowing that. I think California is a good example of what not to do. I don't know why people in Maine think California is such a progressive state. They're kind of like they're going to be broke before they're through. So, but one thing we can learn from California is that from what I understand, the dispensaries exploded there, and they really have a lot of problems with crime and abuse. So I think the go slow and be sure approach is really, I think, relative here. We need to do that. But yeah, again, government intervention now, all of a sudden, any dollars that we're spending out of state is, to me, we need to bring back in state. I'm not an isolationist, but it's like, you know what? We need jobs, we need opportunities here for our Maine people, and there's hundreds of millions of dollars, as you know, that flow out of the state. Contracts and services that could be done and performed in state. We need to focus on that. So as an example right there of, we gotta take care of Mainers.
Right on. Do you think it's appropriate for the Department of Health and Human Services to decide which businesses can operate a dispensary in the state?
Somebody's got to make that determination, and I don't know if they're the best or the worst. Somebody's going to be faced with that. I think personally, law enforcement needs to be involved lockstep all the way, because they know where the problem or potentially problem areas could be, sensitive areas. So I would have them at the table to make sure that we're putting them in, some safe areas and the least sensitive areas. Obviously schools and churches and things like that all need to be taken into consideration. So I would look for law enforcement to be heavily involved in the decision making. It seems to me it would make sense.
When it came to the Citizens Initiative to pass what seemed in spirit to me, the idea was to give medicinal marijuana patients an easier time, more access to their medicine. The legislature and governor immediately passed what was called an amendment to the Citizens Initiative before it even started, and it seems that it added a lot of regulations. They're faced with fees, the growers and the users, and possibly having to register with the Department of Human Services. Do you think that the amendment that was changed fit the spirit of the law that the people passed?
No, not at all. In fact, 59% of the people of the state of Maine passed the medicinal marijuana law. The intent was for them to pass the People's Initiative and to put it into force. They had plenty of time before it got on the referendum ballot to make the changes. They elected to wait till after it was passed in case it wouldn't, so that they could continue on their merry way. But then they've done to the marijuana law what they've done to everything else in the state. Put additional fees, additional controls, because the few in Augusta that have been going down this 35-year sliding path to bankruptcy is to put more regulation, more fees. They have now turned it into a profit center rather than a cost center. And for the state of Maine, It should be a cost center. We should provide the medicinal marijuana for the patients at the least possible cost that we can do, and that's not what the state has done.
We really need to look at, when the citizens pass a referendum like that, if it's not blatantly going down the wrong path, there is enabling legislation that needs to be created. Enabling being the key word. Let's implement what the citizens had in mind. And then you get to your regulatory responsibilities of agencies that are going to oversee that. I believe that citizens' referendums that pass the test of the voter and pass the test of the folks that assemble those referendums and the legal reviews that they go through before they're put out to the citizens need to be honored and given an opportunity to work. Why are we coming along and amending something that hasn't even been implemented yet? That to me is overstepping the bounds. It's a representative form of government. I'll say this as well. I am the only candidate that attended, and we were all invited, the symposium that was held down at the University of Southern Maine. I believe that was back in, geez, I want to say March or April now. It was quite some time back. I don't remember if I was on the ballot at that point. I really can't. The time is piling up on me as I go through this contest. But I will say I attended the forum. Sheriff Mark Dion of Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, Maine Municipal Association, Bangor Chief of Police, many doctors and home care providers, and many patients were there. It's imperative that we get out in front and make certain that communication happens with our law enforcement. The critical piece to making that initiative successful, even though they've now overstepped their bounds, if we're going to have any hopes of making that law work, we have to have the inclusion of the law enforcement society. And I'll be honest with you, Jarrod, the other night I was asked in a debate format, would I support the legalization of marijuana and tax that as a revenue source for the state of Maine? I believe that's something I would look at. I said yes in a lightning round. I don't think that's a very sincere way to get to problem solving, is lightning rounds. But absolutely, I would support understanding whether or not we can get our hands around something that essentially is medicine and will work to the benefit of raising revenues, and regulating something that seems to be pushed into a dark corner. Obviously, there are European models that work extremely well with having controlled substances be legal. It's hard to control a substance that's illegal. If we want to get a control on it and manage it for the benefit of our society and our revenue streams, we need to legalize some of these things.
Well, that's very interesting, because that is kind of the elephant in the room with this conversation about the medicinal marijuana.
On the medicinal piece, I think a few
will
folks
it eventually lead to full legalization?
Yeah, you know, I've had that conversation with some physicians and some friends, and you know, they talk about thinking it's going that way, or they're really not sure. And obviously the law enforcement community too. Some of those folks believe that medicinal is the first step to making it legal. I think we're being disingenuous. We're really not looking at the realities of a 21st century model. Alcohol is legal, and as a result, it can be controlled and monitored and regulated. Tobacco, a very dangerous poison chemical. I don't know if there's anybody who would say otherwise. Folks are allowed and entitled to enjoy that at their adult responsibility, but you know, it's a harmful chemical, and we've legalized that so we can control who buys it, where it's distributed, things of that nature, age brackets. I think we could go in that same direction and really improve that medicine delivery, and also maybe improve some other elements of our society. Our jails are overcrowded with nonviolent offenders. There's a number of issues here. Maine has a legislature. The legislature needs to answer to the people. We'll see where that goes, but as governor, I wouldn't stand in the way of that.
The other candidates did not make themselves available for today's discussion, but we do know that Senator Mitchell voted in favor of amending the People's Initiative. This is Jarrod LeBlanc going in-depth on the issues that matter with Maine Web News.
Experience the future of Maine News today at mainewebnews.com.
Consider making www.mainewebnews.com your homepage. You'll be able to use our Start Page search engine, which does not record your IP address or track your searches like other search engines.